We've come to the end of the book of Revelation. What a challenging book. It seems fitting to me. The last book in our Bible is a book that humbles us. And we try to understand this book, we start thinking we're pretty good, but every explanation I have ever studied in regard to the book of Revelation has its own challenges with us. And so we've really got to be humble. And when you're looking at passages like this, you have to be careful. You don't start drawing off whole new ideas and doctrines that aren't taught elsewhere in the Scriptures. Stay with what you know and interpret those difficult passages in light of what we know the Bible teaches. And that'll give us a good, safe way to go through this. The book of Revelation constantly tells us, 7 times it tells us from the beginning to the end, these things will happen shortly. The time is at hand. I'm coming quickly. And there's an urgency throughout this book. And yet you read things in here that just seem beyond our time. How can that be? Well, remember the kind of language Revelation is written in is figurative and exaggerated language. These churches were facing real persecutions and real challenges ahead. And those churches overcame those, and I'm convinced that the triumph of that church over its impending problems is described in Revelation 21 and 22. But it's described in the terms of the church's eternal glory. And so when I read these verses and I'm thinking about heaven, that's what we're supposed to be thinking about. And we see that church overcoming its problems, described as its eternal glory that is to come. Now with that, let's go into these 2 verses and look at this. These are the passages people have turned to for thousands of years to renew their hopes about heaven. And you can't tell it all in one sermon. I couldn't. I had to divide it in 2. In fact, I'll tell you, when I come to a great passage like this, I just know before I stand up to preach, I cannot do this justice. I've seen too many excellent preachers preach on these things, and I thought they have failed. And I feel like that's what I will do today as I try to explain what we have here about the beauty of our eternal home. But I did it in 2 lessons. Quick review. The city that it was to come is the city of no more. Remember, some of these will take some explanation I won't go into, but we don't have to have a lot of explanation to understand. No more tears. No more death. No more sorrow or crying or pain. And then we'd have to explain how no temple, no sun, no moon, no night, but no curse. Well, there'll be no candle. And there are other things that won't be there. No fear. No unbelieving, no abominable murderers, whoremongers, sorcerers, idolaters, liars, defilers, and dogs. All those things that take the joy of living away from us, not in this city. It's the city of no more. But now the lesson this morning. And that is how beautiful heaven must be. There are things described in these 2 chapters that as you look at them, the only reason they must be there is just to impress us with the beauty of that city that is to come. And so we'll go through it looking at it this way. How beautiful heaven must be. Now, one of the reasons heaven's going to be beautiful is because heaven is going to be new. Revelation 21, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and first earth were passed away. In verse 2, John saw the holy city, New Jerusalem. And then verse 5, He that sat on the throne said, behold, I make all things new. Something beautiful about something new, isn't it? It's not marred. It's not spoiled. No. Now, there's two different words the Greeks had for new. They had a word for new that meant new as respect to time. But that's not the word that's used here. This is the word new, as in new in respect to kind. This is a new kind of heaven and a new kind of earth, a new kind of Jerusalem. It's going to be unlike that which has gone before. And so it's going to be described in terms that we'll be familiar with. But remember, this is talking about something new. There's another word that the Greeks had for renew. But that's not the word used here either. The old has passed away. This is something new. It's going to be beautiful because it's going to be a city. A lot of time we might think of city, we think of old dirty city streets and the bad parts of city, but just think about it. Cities can be beautiful, can't they? I say they're beautiful from a distance. I've seen them from the air, flying over at night, and see cities just lit up, and they just look so beautiful. I remember seeing Fort Lauderdale coming in at night from the ship across that dark gulf, sitting on the front of that ship watching, and then the city begins to just rise out of the horizon, and oh, it was gloriously beautiful. And so this is going to be a city, and it's a city of beauty. The holy city, New Jerusalem. The great city, Holy Jerusalem. A city with 12 gates. 12 foundations. Now it lieth 4 square, and the length is as large as the breadth, 12,000 furlongs. If you want to put that in a measure, think of 1,500 miles. Well, if you were to get in a car and drive 100 miles an hour through that city, it'd take you 15 hours to cross that city. Well, it's not a literal measure, is it? It's just going to be a huge city. And not only in its length and its breadth, the length and the breadth and the height of it are equal. You've seen these tall skyscrapers in a city. What about a city that reaches 1,500 miles into the sky? Why, it's to impress us. It's beyond anything we've seen. It's beyond proportion for us to describe that. And then we talk about a city. You know, Abraham looked for a city like that. I hear people tell us now, in the Old Testament, they didn't really understand things about heaven and hell and eternity, not in the Old Testament. And in a large part, they're true, because truth and immortality comes to light in Christ. But sometimes you read things that make you think maybe they understood more than we give them credit for. It says in Hebrews 11, 8 through 16, by faith, Abraham sojourned in a land of promise as in a strange country. For he looked for a city which hath foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And he confessed they were strangers and pilgrims on the earth. For they that say such things declare plainly that they seek a country. And truly, if they'd been mindful of that country from which they came out, they might have had opportunity to have returned, but now they desire a better country. That is, an heavenly. Wherefore God's not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. In the old days of Israel, they gloried in their Jerusalem. They thought Jerusalem was the most beautiful city set on that hill. And we read about the beauty of Jerusalem in the book of the Psalms. And the beauty of Jerusalem lies in the fact that it was the city of God. And so we read in Psalm 48, great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God. Beautiful for situation, The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion. On the sides of the north, the city of the great king, God is known in her palaces for a refuge. As we have heard, so we have seen in the city of the Lord of hosts. In the city of our God, God will establish it forever. Walk about Zion. Go round about her. Tell the towers thereof. Mark ye well her bulwarks. Consider her palaces, that ye may tell to the generation following. For this God is our God forever and ever, and He will be our guide even unto death. Listen again, Psalm 84. How amiable are thy tabernacles, O Lord of hosts. My soul longeth, yea, even fainteth for the courts of the Lord. Blessed are they that dwell in thy house. They will still be praising thee. They go from strength to strength. Every one of them in Zion appeareth before God. A day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I'd rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. The Lord will give grace and glory. No good thing will He withhold from them that walk uprightly. One more time. Psalms 87. His foundation is in the holy mountains. The Lord loveth the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Glorious things are spoken of thee, O city of God, and of Zion it shall be said, this and that was born in her, and the highest himself shall establish her. The Lord shall count when He writeth up the people that this man was born there. Selah. Well, that's how they praise earthly Jerusalem. How much more then this new Jerusalem where we're going to go dwell with God. And in the context of the book of Revelation, you've got to remember the troubles that were coming on the churches were coming from a city, an earthly city, Babylon, the mother of harlots, the abominations of the earth. God's prepared for us a city. It's greater than anything ever on this earth. And so this city at the end of the book is set in contrast to that wicked city that has fallen throughout the book of Revelation. It's going to be as beautiful as a bride. Now, we men, I hope you remember, boy, I remember standing and watching that bride adorned for me. One of the most beautiful things that a man can set his eyes on, and it sears into the memory and never leaves. And when it's describing this city, you can think of something beautiful. She'll be as beautiful as a bride adorned for her husband. Now, you might think that bride is pretty walking down the aisle. Boy, you get in the head of that groom and it's just, she is beautiful. And so, this city is described in such beauty. Revelation 21:2, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. Revelation 21 and verse 9, come hither, I'll show thee the bride, the Lamb's wife. Revelation 19, 7 and 8, his wife hath made herself ready, and her garment, and to her was granted that she should be arrayed in fine linen, for fine linen is the righteousness of the saints. And so we read in Ephesians chapter 5, 25 through 27, talking about the glory of God's church and the beauty that God sees of His church. Christ also loved the church and gave Himself for it, that He might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word, that He might present it to Himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. Well, He's not through. Talk about the beauty of this city. You like the beauty of Christmas? You know, you see everything so decorated and all the ornaments on the trees and it's all the sparkling colors and it's like jewels, isn't it? Think of a whole city arrayed in such beauty. It'll be garnished with precious stones. Revelation 21:18, beginning. The building of the wall of it was of jasper, and the city was pure gold, like unto clear glass. And the foundations of the wall of the city were garnished with all manner of precious stones. The first foundation was jasper, the second sapphire, the third a chalcedony, the fourth an emerald, the fifth a sardonyx, the sixth a sardius, the seventh a chrysolite, the eighth a beryl, the ninth a topaz, the 10th a chrysoprase, the 11th a zenith, the 12th an amethyst. And the 12 gates were 12 pearls. Every several gate was of one pearl. And the street of the city was pure gold, as it were transparent glass. Now there's things in the book of Revelation that in the midst of these symbols, it reminds you, and don't take this literal, that this isn't real. We're talking in figurative language of describing something beyond what we can describe. Because look, it says the streets are of gold, like transparent glass. Now gold is not transparent like glass. This can't be a real description, but it is a figurative description, and the purpose of it is to impress on us the beauty of what God has prepared. When I read about all these emeralds and precious stones and jewels, I'm reminded of the beauty as described of Eden in Genesis 2, verses 10 through 12. And it says, a river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and came into 4 heads. The name of the first was Pison, that it is which compassed the whole land of Havilah, where there is gold. And the gold of that land is good. And there's bdellium and the onyx stone. For so long has God described beauty in terms of the precious jewels. And so also then at this last, he describes our eternal home and garnishes it with such beauty to us in that description. Now, like Eden, there was a river. And there's a river in this city. Revelation 22 and verse 1. He showed me a pure river of water of life, clear as crystal, proceeding out of the throne of God and of the Lamb. In verse 6, and I will give to him that is athirst of the fountain of the water of life freely. Revelation 22 and verse 6, on either side of the river where the tree of life, which bare 12 manner of fruits, and yielded her fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree were for the healings of the nations. You remember the tree of life from the Garden of Eden? That was the tree that they could partake of, and that they could eat thereof and live forever. It is because of sin that they were banished from the tree of life. But in describing the beauty of our heavenly home, the tree of life is there. We can live forever. And the leaves of the tree, the healings of the nations. So all that's lost by sin from Eden, it's all recovered when we get to heaven. Now, above all, this city is beautiful because that's where God is. We will be with God, and God will be with us. Revelation 21 in verse 3. Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God shall be with them and be their God. Revelation 21, 22, and 23. The Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the temple of it. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. And then 22, verses 3 and 4. The throne of God and of the Lamb shall be in it, and they shall see the face of God. Moses on Mount Sinai asked God, show me thy glory. God couldn't do it. He says, stay in the cleft of the rock. I'll cover thee with my hand, and my glory will pass before me. And it says he saw the hind parts of God. To be in that city and to see his face. How beautiful heaven must be. That makes Christ beautiful, doesn't it? Does that not make that cross beautiful to you? And his church, glorious and beautiful. And that simple little plan that even a child can read and understand and obey. Isn't it beautiful? That if we will hear the gospel of Jesus Christ and believe and turn from our sin and confess his name before men and be baptized into Christ and come up out of that water a new creature to serve him all the days of our life, and this hope of glory before us, how beautiful. And so let me entice you to desire that city that Abraham longed for. That can be your city. If you'll hear, believe, and obey the gospel of Jesus Christ. So do it as we stand and sing. You come forward and we'll teach you.